I am now going to hand this off to Kathy Sisneros for an introduction into systems. We are the ones, we are the ones, we've been waiting. We are the ones, we are the ones, we've been waiting. We are the ones, we've been waiting. We are the ones, we've been waiting.
You'll see a connection at the end of the presentation. And as I was prepping, truthfully, yesterday and today, things come together, right? So welcome everybody. I am Kathy Sisneros. I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs here at CSU. I'm in midway of year 8, and so a little hard to believe, and it's easy when we're surrounded with some fantastic folks that I'm still a puppy in the room on CSU. Until I'm in double digits, I don't think it actually counts. So I still have a year and a half before I'm like, I don't know if this is really a place for me. So I want to say I can feel a little bit of nerves, which is, I think, actually pretty great, because I think about when I can feel that is because when I think it matters more. This is a space where I think it matters more. And so it's a pleasure to be invited into the space and thinking that I might have something to offer in terms of navigating systems. So we'll jump into that. And as I was sharing earlier with folks at the table, is that some of my story will naturally come out as I go through some of this. And you'll see how random my brain works also in terms of what I pull together. So let's get that going. All right. I pulled from a variety of places. I want folks to really take this in. I will read it out loud. And so this comes from a disability scholar. And she's talking about the question of access can arise from anyone at any time and anywhere from innumerable reasons. Access is a way people have of relating to the ways they are embodied as beings in particular places where they find themselves. By embodied, I mean all the ways we have to sense, feel, and move in the world, and these are mediated by the interests of social environments, including race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and obviously we could think of others we would add. Access is a way to orient to and even come to wonder about who, what, where, and when we find ourselves to be in social space. Now, if that doesn't capture some of the nuance and the importance of how we have to navigate systems, I don't know what does, right? This is living and breathing for us every single day in all of our roles. I think about myself. I'm a first-gen college student, probably like many in the room. I share often that I didn't really want to go to college, but I didn't want the alternative. So I ended up in college, and I've never left. So here I am. So something stuck and something worked, right? And all of those pieces that I was taking into college and everything that has evolved from continues to help me think about this in the spaces that I occupy and when aspects of our identity evolve and don't evolve. And we're always trying to figure out what that means in time, place, and context of what that looks like, right? The other thing that came to mind, because my brain does work in strategic ways, I think, most days, I thought, and I can't play chess. My nephew's tried to teach me. He's 11 and too smart for his own good. And I haven't figured out playing chess yet. I think that on a college campus, I see the institution as my chessboard, disproportionately, right? And I think that what they say about, from my understanding, who in here plays chess? Anyone? Who's really good at it? Oh, and then hands kind of, I love that hands sort of go like this. Well, from what my understanding is, to be a really good chess player is you need to be able to see the whole board. I think most days I can see most of the campus and institutions, or at least the areas in which I know that I'm a part of. And so I think that it's understanding and learning and figuring out what are the moves, who are the players, and how do we go about doing this. And I think that we got to figure out how to continue to navigate that. And if you go back to the first part of access, all of those layers of identity continually interact with what that means, right? Strategically thinking about that. I was also thinking about these, whenever you're asked to do a presentation, it takes you back in a lot of different ways. I think I've only had one male identified supervisor my entire career, and that was maybe for a year, right? I don't think many people can say that. And not only that, women, and I've had women of color. The entire time here, it's been a woman of color, right? So for me, that's important and pretty powerful and pretty fortunate. I've had queer identified women as well, also fortunate and powerful, right? So all of these play in to how we then think about and how we can engage. I can have very different conversations with Blanche, who's my direct supervisor, than I can with somebody else, and we can short circuit it. And if I'm asking her a navigational question about campus, I can short circuit that and she understands the understanding underneath, right? And so I think that all of those pieces matter in terms of who we have into our spaces and when we think about it. I also pulled up some quotes, right? This is another reality of an institution, right? We can usually define patriarchy as a set of social relations between men, which have a material base and which, though hierarchical, establish or create interdependence and solidarity among men that enable them to dominate women. Now, we know that sometimes that's super overt, and we also understand that probably more often than not, it's subtle, covert, or we're not even in a room when this is happening, right? And so it's being aware of that and understanding the historic nature of the institution and who's been invited to the party and which party. Because there's still parties happening and we're not invited to all of them, just to be clear. And truth be told, I don't want to be invited to some of them. All right? And they still exist and they still matter. So it's being mindful of how this plays out for each of us in our roles, right? I had to do something a little more, this speaks back to some of my scholarship too. And so Edgar Schoen and the model of culture. And it's always a simple, probably people are familiar with the iceberg model. And again, I think for navigating systems, we can't lose sight of this. We can't lose sight of what's on the surface. I have a great colleague and a co-instructor, male identified, so Ryan Barone. He and I have wonderful conversations about this because I actually think of him as an ally and an accomplice. And I don't know if we have a lot of those, right? But he's really good at engaging in all levels of this with other male identified folks on campus in ways that matter. And so I say that to you because I think about who helps us navigate, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, is that we have to have folks from all walks on this campus, positionally, gender, culture, right? All of those things matter. People who are our people, right? Because commiseration is also necessary. And so how do we do all of that and bring it into the space? And what this says to me is that there's a language at play that we don't always know about. What's coded and what's not coded, and who helps us to decode that language. That's why this matters. And that's why it matters that you need folks who are faculty, who are in the classified ranks, who are students, right? Because we're all speaking a different language. On some days we think we're speaking the same language. We all know we're speaking a different language. But to build some of those bridges, we need to understand what's underneath, right? And how do we move forward with that? Here's some of what I was talking about before. Identities matter, right? Not all of these relate to who I am and how I identify, and they definitely impact people's experiences on campus. So if you can't see them, I have woman of color, international, adjunct, tenured faculty. You'd have tenured up there. Parent, single parent, gender nonconforming, queer women of color, visible disability, right? These are just a handful. We know the list can go on. And all of those affect how we think about navigating the systems for ourselves and with others, right? Those questions constantly, if they're not super conscious for you, they're probably beneath, And part of it is that most of us have learned how to navigate and not giving a whole lot of thought as to why I'm taking a left turn when the dude is going forward. We've just learned that we have to take a left turn before we can get to the same place. Because it's become so unconscious for us as well in terms of our strategies and our coping mechanisms in terms of how we do the work. The piece is to notice why you're taking a different path and asking the question. Even that beginning of awareness of asking the question, why is it that I need to go this way, or why does that person get to go that way, right? Asking the questions. Then I went old school, right? And I was intentional about making sure that the Pac-Man had the images with the ghosts, right? Because we think on your far left, we think about, okay, I'm ready. I got this game. I can see it. I know where I'm going. I can see where the disruptions are going to be. I can see where the barriers might come in or the risks, right? Then you start playing. You're like, okay, I'm cool. I'm cruising along. We know that the ghosts eventually sort of disappear, but then what happens? They reappear somewhere new. And we don't always see that. We don't always see where that next hurdle's coming. And so it's that strategy constantly of like, we think we're on course, and there's always going to be something that we need to shift and pivot around. And so again, thinking about who can help us learn the game, right? How do we learn to do that? Another, Sarah Ahmed does tons of wonderful work. And one of her quotes is, solidarity does not assume that our struggles are the same struggles, or that our pain is the same pain, or that our hope is for the same future. Solidarity involves commitment and work, as well as the recognition that even if we do not have the same feelings, or the same lives, or the same bodies, we do live on common ground. I think about everyone who's in this room today. I hope this is not just aspirational, but something that we can breathe and practice, understanding that this group in here needs to be on common ground, right? And how do we continue to do that? How do we continue to uplift and understand when someone's having a harder day, or how do you make it easier because of something within the system that is extra hard for someone in here to navigate when it shouldn't be, right? How do we do that? I have some questions. I'll read them out loud, and I do want you to quickly engage at your table just for a minute of any of them that resonate. What messages do you recall receiving, and by who along the way, about how you're going to be successful, right? Who has helped you navigate? What intentional, I love when I see my typos up here. What intentional steps did you take based on an experience or feedback to pivot in a particular direction regarding your role and career, right? Oftentimes we think we have it mapped out. I can still see myself sitting in a conference room in the administration building as a young professional at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it was kind of like our Women's Commission, Gender and Commission group here. And I was sitting there, and I don't remember what the topic was. What I do remember is how I felt. And I felt that I wasn't heard. I know why I wasn't heard. I didn't have a degree. I was young. I'm Latina. All of that showed up in the room that day. I am now a doctor. There's a reason for it, and it goes back directly to that moment that day. That was Sylvia, I think. Right? But I think about those are the moments. There was something that happened, and it pivoted very directly for me, right? And how do we take all the small moments as lessons? Is there awareness and intentionality based on aspects of identity for you? What aspects of identity are most salient for you as you navigate in your field, your unit, meetings, et cetera, on campus? So again, thinking about the different spaces that you intentionally or are asked to have to occupy. And then lastly, do you have to intentionally ask for assistance and guidance? And again, from who? Who helps you, right? So just take about 2 minutes and just sort of check in with each other and see what resonates. I can't help it, I'm a facilitator by nature. So if you wouldn't mind checking in, that would be great. I'm going to invite you back. I know it's hard. And hopefully, I guess my hope for even all of the information that I just sort of tossed out here is that hopefully you saw yourself somewhere in that. Hopefully some of it resonates with you, and not just in the problematic ways, right? I hope you could see it in the hopeful ways, in the ways that you can think about how you're doing and why you're here, right? All of you are in here. It means that you're all successful. You're doing something well and you're doing something right on this campus. That's important, and it's important to not lose sight of. So when I think about the navigating of systems too, the shared affirmation and the validation of one another also matters, because it's not easy. Some days are harder than others. Some days are easier than others, right? And so having those small reminders, I think, helps us continue to interrogate this, to interrogate the system, and to really think strategically about how to keep moving forward, right? So I shared with, I love Fabiana Rodriguez. I love her work. And so I needed to find something to end the day with. And that's where I pulled June Jordan's quote. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And again, we are the ones, truthfully, that can continue to transform the institution. I genuinely believe that. I think about oftentimes the spaces that I'm sitting in. I can't tell you how many spaces that I sit in that are disproportionately women. Disproportionately. There's sometimes I look around like, is there a single dude in here? And I also get it, right? So the work that I do, and depending on where the question is, but that's also what shifts the culture, right? I know what spaces I get to occupy on campus and the responsibility that comes with that, right? And before I pass it over, I know that we're going to invite our panel up here. I'm going to give you a little quick entertainment of our panel today. Deanna's the only one off the hook. So I was invited to do this, and of course, everything. My brain works last minute and timing and et cetera. But about a week or so ago, first I get an email from Sandy Quackenbush. Hey, Kath, can we meet? Before this, I want to know what you're talking about. I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about. That's like over a week away. I don't know. But sure, we can meet. So we had, maybe a 5-minute conversation, but helped sort of bring it down. I pop into my boss's office yesterday, probably around, mid-morning. And I'm like, hey, Blanche, I know this is like easily 12 hours away, so you may not have had time to give it any thought yet. And she's like, what are you talking about? Yep. Pretty much. Yep. She's like, no, I haven't given it any thought. She's like, so what are you going to talk about? I'm like, awesome. I'm like, well, here's what I'm thinking. She's like, that's great. So I'm like, thanks, boss. Walk out. Have a meeting last night. See Mary across the room. Make our usual eye contact. She's like, I got 2 things for you. I knew what one was because I'd sent an email earlier in the day. I'm like, okay. I didn't see the second one coming, and I should have, because I'd already had 2 other people. So what are you talking about tomorrow? So I want you to know that your panel is super prepared and ready to share their wisdom with you. So at the end, I'm going to eat my lunch, and at the end, I think there's a Q&A that I'm happy to also engage in. But you have 4 amazing women that are going to come up here and share parts of their stories. So thank you.
I'm the youngest one as far as doing this kind of thing, inexperienced. So
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Diana Prieto, and I serve as the Associate Vice President for Human Capital, so think Equal Opportunity, Human Resources, Training and Organizational Development, and the Employee Assistance Program. So in keeping with Kathy's I'm off the hook theme, my partner is Maricela, And I have been thinking about this for several weeks. But will confess to typing it up last night and asking Marisela, how does this sound? Would this make sense? So I think we're all on the same page. So it's a real pleasure to be a part of this panel. It's a real honor to be considered as someone who might have something to share with you. So I'm going to share my story, and maybe there will be pieces of it that will resonate or pieces that you can take. And I think also the Q&A will be really rich in this program. But when I think of systems, there are many components to systems. There are the structures, the policies, the procedures, the practices, the cultures of the culture of the institution, the culture of the department, all of the cultures that embody an institution like ours. That part for me is easy. I'm strategic by nature. Those of you who may have taken are familiar with StrengthsFinder, strategic, number 1. It's how my brain works. So that part for me is easy. It's a puzzle, and how do you put those pieces together? Chess, Kathy's chess game. In the complaint arena, if you've worked with me in the complaint arena, you may have heard me say, it's a game of chess. How do you move the pieces? How do you foretell the next move? How are you prepared? That's just how my brain works. The part, though, that I would say is even more important in a system are people. And I'm going to use my experience in law school as an analogy. So I went to law school thinking I wanted to practice law as either a litigator or international law. And what I quickly learned is that the law itself, the regulations, the structure of our legal system is beautiful. It's amazing. But that's not the practice of law. The practice of law is fraught with humanity. All of the, and I see a lot of nodding, all of the aspects of ourselves that we bring to what we do. And that quickly dissuaded me from practicing law, that reality. So to me, when I think of systems and navigating systems, what is very prominent are the people within the system. So what I have learned is certainly I prepare, I learn what the policy is, I learn what the practice is. If I'm meeting with a new dean or a new vice president, I'll look at the story and source, I'll Google them, I'll go to their previous institution and learn a little bit about them before I go to my meeting. So all that preparation takes place, for sure. But what I've learned over time is that I actually needed to get to know myself well and better and my identities. And the reason for that is I have the reserve and the formality of my upbringing in Colombia. I was born to a Colombian father and to a mother from Illinois, and was raised until the age of 13 in Bogota, Colombia, in South America. And so not only do I have the reserve and the formality of that upbringing, but I also have, if we think of gender, a very gendered upbringing, in the sense that what I learned as a child growing up in Bogota was to be the hostess with the mostest. And what I mean by that, and I see some nodding, what I mean by that is how I watched my mother do this. This is how we were raised. How do I anticipate the guest in my home, their need, and meet their need before maybe even they know they have the need? And that very much infuses, whether it's good or bad, infuses my work as well. But when I speak about so my family, at the age of 13, my family moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And when I was growing up in Bogota, the school that I attended and the world that I navigated was very international. So the school that I attended was attended by Colombians, Americans, and a very large international group of, if you think of executives and diplomats, their kids went to the school. So I was very much in an environment of a lot of different cultures. So some of you may have heard the term third culture kid, third culture individual. I'm a third culture kid, okay? And so for those of you who maybe haven't heard of it, going to share a definition. It's a term used to refer to children raised in a culture other than their parents or the culture of the country given on the child's passport, where they are legally considered native for a significant part of their early developmental years. They are exposed to a great variety of cultural influences. That was me in my upbringing. Third culture individuals move between cultures before they have had the opportunity to fully develop their personal and cultural identity. The third culture to which the term refers is the mixed identity that a child assumes. And that very much describes me. What this has meant for me, though, is I don't belong in any one environment, but I have the wonderful facility of being able to go into many different environments. So I can easily come in and out of environments. The downside to that, though, is when you don't fully belong in an environment, it can leave an impact. And so for me, what that impact has been is I feel comfortable in my reserve, in my diplomacy, in being a subject matter expert. That's super comfortable for me. But it's always not very effective in the workplace. And the reason for that is early in my career, I got a lot of feedback when I was at Purdue University and became the director of the equity office there that I was all about business. And I was. People didn't know who I was. And if people don't know who you are, it's hard to connect. It's hard to see you as something than your position. Which when your position as the director of an equity office, that's already intimidating enough. So this wasn't helpful at all. And so what I learned to do was to network. And I started in little ways. I'd go to a meeting early, or I'd stay and linger, and I'd engage in small talk with an individual that I'd make a plan. In today's meeting, I'm gonna try to connect with this person. And I try to, by virtue of listening and learning, would learn something about that person that I could connect to. I don't have children, so often it would be about pets, and I'd talk about my dog, and it would create a connection, or an activity that the person enjoyed that I also enjoyed. And so I learned very quickly in my new role as director at Purdue that I needed to figure out how to connect with others. Because when people didn't see me as a person, it made it really difficult for me to then do the work that I needed to do with that individual. And so that was a big learning point in terms of navigating systems for me. So I was very strong in one area, but not strong at all in another, and I needed to balance those two areas. And so that's what I set out to do very purposefully. And to this day, we'll share, when there is like a meet and greet or there is a celebration on campus, I will think about, okay, because I'm an introvert, so I would rather be in the corner talking to one person. But that doesn't work very well for me in my role. So what I do is I set a goal. I'm going to approach these two people this afternoon and engage in a small conversation with these two people. And that has been a very conscious part of learning to navigate systems for me. I will also share that what is still a challenge for me is humor. As a 13-year-old moving to the United States, I just really struggled with humor. Saturday Night Live, didn't get it. It was all the rage, and I just didn't get it. I was fortunate to I played basketball as a young person, and I was able to immediately join the basketball team, and I remember to this day where a joke will be said, I thought it was hilarious. I was the only one laughing. A joke would be said, the rest of the team is laughing. I didn't get it. So even to this day, I struggle a little bit with humor and need to kind of work on that. But just ways in which I try to work to be able to connect with folks. And networking is the one I wanted to share today that I have found has been so very important in order to be able to get to know people. But in essence, to navigate systems, what I think about is I listen and I learn before I jump in. I learn all about the pieces I've talked about, policies, procedures, people, humor, culture, try to assess all of that so that I can then put the pieces on the board and understand where I need to go. I definitely think about being a subject matter expert, know what you're talking about. From a very gendered perspective, that is my calling card, if you will, knowing what I'm talking about. So I'm heard. Learning to interact with others so that they can see me as Diana. You'll see I hear you'll see I say my name in both languages. My parents purposefully gave us names that could be said in Spanish and English. And really focusing on interests. What are the interests of the other person? Not what they say they want, but rather what do they really need? Identifying that and then working to find win-win outcomes, or at the very least a compromise that can work. And so that really has defined how I've navigated systems in my career, very much feeling always like I'm out here, outside of the circle, and how do I work to navigate in and out of the circle?
My name is, excuse me, Mary Ontiveros, and I am the VP for Diversity here at Colorado State University. I came to Colorado State University as a first-gen student and identify as a Chicana. I know we use Latina and Latinx, et cetera, but I still feel more Chicana than anything. I will share my stories, and I have been here an awful long time. Next year will be my 50th year at Colorado State University. So when I share some of my stories, I think it's really a reflection of how things had been, and I hope you can reflect on how things really have changed. And in some cases, maybe not so much, and in other cases, thankfully, quite a bit. When I think of systems, I think of also process, policy, and procedures. But there are two other P's. I like the alliteration of this, politics and people. And over time, I have come to understand that people and politics are probably even more important than just learning the process, the policies, and the procedures. When Kathy was talking about chess, I do play chess, and I used to be pretty good at it, actually. And understanding the moves and who the players are is so very, very important, and I have learned that. And you will hear through the few stories that I share with you that it is really understanding the players and being given an opportunity to understand who those players are that I think has served me well. I'd like to tell you a story about having run for student body vice president here at Colorado State when I was a student. And my father was very involved with politics, and he was quite a role model for me. And he always taught me that it's really important to get involved, to do things. Well, I was involved with MECHA, and MECHA was a Chicano student organization, if you will. And they, at that point in time, again, remember, 49 years ago or so, about at this point, I guess it would have been 46 years ago, it was really important for them to protest and to do a lot of protesting and to do things outside of the box, if you will. At that point in time, I think we may have had 60 Latinos on campus. Well, we didn't have the numbers. We didn't have the critical mass. And I had been taught that if you find that you cannot do it one way, you have to figure out another way to do it. And so I was told that if you learn the rules and then play by the rules and win using those rules, then you can change the rules after you have won, right? And so I decided to run for student body president independent of MECHA. MECHA had submitted a slate of candidates, and so there was a Chicano candidate for each of the positions for president, vice president, et cetera, et cetera. I was not one of those candidates. And I wasn't because what they were proposing was totally different than what I was proposing. So when I went to MECHA to ask for their support, now who would do that, right? I mean, who would go to MECHA to ask for the support when they had their own slate of candidates? Well, I did. And they just totally, it wasn't pleasant, let's put it that way. It was quite unpleasant. And every question they asked, I had to be able to answer. I'm doing this for these reasons. It is important to win. If we're going to change anything, we have to win. And your process is not going to allow you to win. We don't have the numbers. And so, it was really trying to make a case for that. Now, I mentioned that my father had been involved in politics, and this is in Pueblo. And back in the day in Pueblo, Colorado, if you weren't a Democrat, you probably were not going to win. And in fact, I tell a story of how a Republican was elected dog catcher, literally, and was killed the following, within a month or something. I mean, honestly. And so my father always was trying to was always trying to do things within the Democratic Party. Well, it wasn't working for him. So he went around it, and he, with others, started a political party called La Raza Unida Party. And they tried to go around. They said, you have to do something different. If something's not going to work, you have to do something different. And it was a lonely kind of situation for me. I mean, I was the only one doing that. And then I met somebody, and her name was Polly Baca. And I don't know how many of you have ever heard that name. She was the first Latina who was elected to the legislature here in Colorado. She's a graduate of Colorado State University. And she happened to come to visit one day. And she went through the student government offices, and I met her. And she endorsed what I was doing. And she said, what you're doing is exactly what you need to do. It is important that somebody get elected. And it's not that I didn't believe necessarily in the platform of Mecha's platform. I just didn't think it was going to be a winning situation. Bottom line, I won. And so I think the kinds of differences that I made in ASCSU at that time were significant. And I'll just give one example. And it's this case to this day. ASCSU has a lot of money, lots of money, and you can't spend it unless you are part of an organization, right? And so I created a fund where individual students could ask for that money in order to spend it on campus for the betterment of campus. And so we were able to do that. I thought we were going to change the world. ASCSU was going to change the world. We didn't, but but we did do some important things, and they're still here today. So that was my student government story, and how I learned early on that if you have to do something differently in terms of a system, then you just have to do it. When I was hired, my first professional position was Assistant Director of Admissions in charge of minority recruitment. And when I was hired, it was the first time that a woman had ever been hired to travel for the university. So if there's anybody here from admissions, you all travel all the time, right? Here's Priscilla. Well, this was the first time. And there were real concerns about women traveling. And so they had never hired a woman in a position to recruit because they were concerned about having a woman on the road and how dangerous that would be, right? Well, I would travel to Denver the first few weeks, and they were Denver and back, and then I had a trip that was going to take me out of town for a whole week. And so I decided to carpool with my colleague from Boulder. And he had former students in Grand Junction, so he wanted that evening after we traveled to Grand Junction, he wanted to go see these students perform. So we went to do that. The student who was now established in Grand Junction said, well, instead of staying in a hotel, my parents have a trailer that you could stay in. And so my colleague said, well, why don't we just do that? We could save money. He was always trying to save Boulder money. I just couldn't get that. And so he said, why don't we just stay in this place? And I said, that's fine. So we get there, and his first request is, why don't you sleep with me? Because there's only one alarm clock. And because there's only one alarm clock, and we have to wake up at the same time, this way we'll be in the same room. And I thought, what's wrong with this picture? And I said, no, I'm fine. And it was probably 3 weeks into my first job here. I was freaked out. I thought, oh my God, is this what I'm going to have to deal with forever? And I said, no. And he just push. I didn't, of course. And then the next day, he was so embarrassed by having done that. You know, our relationship became a positive one. We were able to talk about a lot of things. By the way, he was a former priest. Anyway, I thought, now what have I learned about this? And would he have, obviously it was because, you know, as a young woman being hired, he had never traveled, and all of the concerns that people had about women being involved, I thought, this is not a good thing. So time passes, I become the director of admissions 8 years later. And that was the same year I had my son. And I can tell you that it totally forced me to rethink what was important in life. Because up until that point, it was not unusual for me to go to work at 7 o'clock, to come home at 11 o'clock, and to do that 7 days a week. And I just felt that I had to do it. I mean, I needed to work. So I was the first director of admissions at Colorado State who was a person of color. And it was such a big thing. It was in USA Today. You know, those little sections of the paper where they say what's happening in different states, there it was. And I thought, seriously, this is such a big deal? But when I was being interviewed, one of my mentors was on one of the committees, and he was horrible. He asked me the most difficult questions ever. I was almost in tears because I thought, why are you doing this to me? And afterwards he said, I had to do that because I know that you're capable, but not everybody else does. And I needed to give you an opportunity to show that you are capable of being the director of admissions. So I was hired to do that, to be director of admissions. And I started to learn right away that there were some issues that people had with that. People literally came to me and after a couple of years and said that they thought that I would only hire Mexicans. And so they were concerned that I would become the director of admissions because I would only hire Mexicans. And I thought, seriously, you really seriously thought that? The person who was my boss asked me to give up anything I had been doing related to diversity. I had been the assistant director in charge of minority recruitment, and he said, people still think of you as the person in charge of minority recruitment. They will not see you as a director of the entire office if they still see you doing diversity work. And he said, I ask that you stop doing it for at least a year. Any committee that you're on, any efforts that you are engaged in, I would ask that you stop doing it. And initially I was pretty upset about that, but I did it, and I think it was the right decision because people still saw me as a student, and people still saw me, and in some situations they still saw me as a work-study student. And they still associated everything I did as being associated with diversity, and they thought that I would only be viewing the world through a diversity lens and not through a more general lens. He spent as much time as he could with me, and so my mentors at that time, when I was hearing Kathy saying that, you know, the people that she has reported to have all been women, for me they were always men. And these people were generally very positive and wanted to see me succeed. And they had interesting notions about how that should work and how it should look. When I said that I needed an associate director of admissions, the person who was the most qualified was another Latina, and I was told very, very clearly that you cannot hire her because she is Latina and this institution is not prepared to have two women of color in a leadership position in the same office. And so I couldn't hire her. So the person I hired was a white male, and I told him that you are very, very good, but you're not the best candidate. The best candidate is a Latina, and I can't hire her for these reasons, but I know you're going to do great. And actually he did. He really did great. So when he left, I went back again, and at this point in time, things had changed. This was 3 years later, And I was told by my boss at that time, another male, and he said, I think it's time the university became used to this. And so it was the first time that there were two people of color in charge of a major office on campus. And guess what? The world did not fall apart. We continued to be successful. But it was clear that last week I had shared that we often felt that we had the weight of all people of color on our shoulders, or all Latinos. And I felt that I had to know all the rules and regulations, and I had to follow all of the rules and regulations that the university had, that we could make no mistakes, that any kind of publication we sent out had to be absolutely perfect, because if it wasn't, people would tell me that's why we didn't want to hire a Mexican. And I am convinced that I would have been confronted with that. As it is, I was confronted with situations where people said, I am going to do everything to make sure that you get fired. And the person who told me that is, I still see that individual at luncheons and things like that. And so I had to figure out, how do I navigate around that? Who does he know, and who should I approach? And you had to start learning who knows whom, and how do you deal with that? And you have to deal with it. I had to deal with it. And it is important to deal with it and not to just let it go. And in this case, I went directly to the provost and said, this is what is going on, and there is a campaign to have me fired. And the reason for that was because I had denied a student whose parents were big donors, and the student was not eligible for admission. And I said, no. And the college didn't like it, and so they were on a campaign to get rid of me. It didn't work, in large part because the provost realized what was going on. So again, in all situations, they were male mentors, male advocates, and I did not have the good fortune of having, I did have female supervisors right at the very end, but we don't want to talk about that. That's a different situation. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. In any case, those are some stories that I wanted to share, and it was, through those experiences that it became clear that, to me, that politics are so very important, and you have to understand the lay of the land, and you have to understand people you are talking to and dealing with. And it was interesting to hear Diana's experience. I generally share a lot with people. I share a lot with staff. Yeah, there's Corey laughing. I will share where I am, what's going on, and I'm pretty transparent about all of that. And some people can appreciate that, and other people are kind of frightened by it, but it seems to have worked for me. And part of it is selfish. I don't want to lose sleep at night thinking about what I should have done, and so I simply just do it. So.
Hi, I'm Blanche Hughes. I serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs. I've been in that position for 11 years, and I haven't been here as long as Mary, but I've been here for 33 years. When I first came here, I came here as a graduate student, and in the Student Affairs and Higher Ed program. It's called something else then, but it's the same program. And planned to be here for just a couple of years, and then ended up being here for this long. And I will say that when I came for orientation and they had all these people get up and say who they were and what they did at the university, and they said, we've been here for 20 years and we've been here for 30 years. And I remember sitting there thinking, what's wrong with these people? Like, how do you stay someplace, the same place for 20 years? What's wrong? And so be careful what you say about things. It could be you one day. I as I thought about this topic, I thought of about sort of 5 points I wanted to make. But, first I'll just start with the personal. In terms of navigating systems, what I've come to realize is that, I am who I am, and my background, all of that follows me and goes with me wherever I go. And that's how I enter a space. And, I was first generation, low income. And so those values around that, and being a woman of color, it stays with you. And I just remember just a couple of days ago, I had to fill out some kind of questionnaire when they asked your socioeconomic status. And I automatically go to the low income. And then okay, now wait. Are they talking about like when I grew up? Are they talking about now? Because probably now I'm not really low income. But there's, I really struggle with that when I have to fill that out, because I still see myself that way. And sometimes I'll be in my neighborhood, I'll see people, look at these people. And I thought, oh, wait, I live in this neighborhood too. So what does that say about me, But I think that's important because it's just how I view things. And so, when I first got my doctorate degree, and people who used to call me Blanche started calling me Dr. Hughes. And I will admit, the first couple of times, I didn't know who they were talking to. And I'm like, why? I'm still just Blanche. And they're like, yeah, no, not so much, And then when I became vice president, it was even worse. Then I was Vice President Hughes. I'm like, really? Did I lose my first name? What is this? But it goes back to how I see myself and not in those roles. And so that's important to know, is kind of knowing who you are. And I think some of us have said that, and really being in touch with that, because how things, connect with you always goes back to that. And I'll have other examples as I talk more. But I think the first thing I'd say about navigating systems is something that was fairly easy for me. And one is building relationships. And I think you've heard that. I'm really extroverted. And I love being around people. I'm one of those people that if I need to get away, I go to a mall. And I might not talk to anybody, but, I'm smiling at people, so they smile back. So I get a little interaction there. And I just like to watch people. The worst thing for me in the world is being home by myself longer than a couple of hours. Then it's like, okay, I can't, no. I am so extroverted. And that really helps in building relationships. And so I've just found, though, that getting to know people and kind of understanding their story and having an opportunity to share yours helps to build a trust. And you can learn so much from people, even people that have values that sometimes are very different than mine. But to understand where that came from and to be able to be in conversation with them, I've just learned so much from doing that. And so, I really put that aside. I want people to work with me and do things with me, not because I'm vice president, but because they want to work with me. They feel some credibility and trust to say, okay, let's do this. And so I also say that I always try to build authentic relationships. That's my goal, because I think that reciprocal learning from each other. But in terms of navigating systems, I also have learned that sometimes I have to forge relationships with people that I would never invite to my house ever, ever, ever. I don't like them, and they may not like me, but that doesn't matter, because I got stuff to do. And I got to do my job. And I have to make sure that I'm doing what I can and what needs to be done for the students, for my staff, for the university. And so now that doesn't mean I pretend that I like them. I'm nice, but I'm nice to everybody, unless you're not nice to me. But I'm not necessarily going to have that same kind of relationship. So, but it fits into sort of the next thing I'll talk about, and that's being strategic. And so in terms of who do I need to know and what do I need to know about them, sort of what Mary was saying, but also what do I need to do, how do I need to help them and teach them, get to know them, so that we can have a relationship so that I can do what I need to do and they can do what they need to do to help students. So in some ways, I try to take the personal out of it. You know, I'm not here. It's not all about me all the time. It's about what I need to do to get things done for the betterment of what my goal is. And I call that being strategic. And I'll have to say, a lot of times I'll start maybe that way in a relationship, and it's been amazing to me that as you work with people, how much you get to know them, and those relationships have changed. And I honestly could say in the 34 years that I've been on this campus, there's only probably been a couple of people that I can honestly say, when they come into a room, I want to leave. That's how much I dislike them. And there were times when I had to work with them. Sometimes not very well, because that's why I don't like them, right? Because their values and things were just way different, and they weren't doing what they were needed to do for students. And it wasn't about them and whether they liked me or not. I didn't like the way that they worked with students or staff. And so, but to say that after 34 years, there have only been a couple of people, I think that says a lot about the working environment. And so I think that's really valuable to build relationships and being strategic. So I like the idea, the meetings before the meetings, and then there are meetings after the meeting too. And so it took me a while to realize that early in my career, where I go in and it's like, wow, but people are really prepared. Like, how did it go from there to there? And we reached that decision, and I don't know how that happened. And of course, they didn't listen to me because I was young and I was a woman and I was a person of color, and these tended to be, because I was in a lot of meetings, because back then, one thing I'd say is there are very few people, diverse individuals on campus, and there was this thing at one point in time where they said, well, we got to have diversity in everything. And so at that point, I was director of Black Student Services, which is the Black African American Cultural Center. So I got to be on all kinds of things and in all kinds of meetings. And sometimes I had no idea what we were talking about, but I was there because I was, But I learned a lot. And but just watching the dynamics of who controlled the meetings, and if I would say something, and people would be like, oh, that's nice. And then somebody else would say it, and it was the best idea ever. And you're thinking, okay, am I crazy, or did I just say that? I don't have as much of that now. And one is because I've been here for 34 years, and I'm a vice president. And so there's times when that comes in handy. I will say that. I've had to come to own that sometimes and use it if I need to, but not very often. And so, and I remember one situation I was in where there was a position that opened up here at CSU that I was kind of interested in. And I didn't really apply for it because it was an appointment, but I just decided not to. But I had thought about it. And later I found out that my supervisor, some other people, all men, had gotten together to see who in the division did they think would be best for that position. And my name came up, and they made the decision that they didn't think that I probably would want it or be ready for it. And I found out about that later, that someone shared that with me, and I thought, well, that's not very nice. And it pissed me off. But those are the meetings, that happen. And then I remember another situation when I was with a colleague, and maybe you've heard this, that a lot of men meet in the bathroom, and that's where they make decisions. Maybe they don't do that as much now, but back in the day, they made a lot of decisions in the bathroom, apparently. And so, where we weren't in there, right? And I remember talking to somebody, another leader, and she and I were in the bathroom, and we were talking business, and I was like, oh, wait. We're like making a decision in the bathroom. We've come a long way. Hey, we can do that too. That's pretty cool. And so just understanding that, and but just being strategic and thinking about what do I need to do, and how do I need to get there, and who do I need to help me get there. So the collaboration and the relationships, that all comes together. Mentorship, and I've had amazing mentors, some who knew they were mentoring me and they were positive, and others that were still mentors. They taught me what not to do. And but it's observing that and having good people just saying, hey, you could do this. Because I never wanted to be a vice president of student affairs. That was never my goal. I was happy being director of Black Student Services and getting to teach and getting to know students. And I was prepared to have that position till I retired. I got my PhD because I started to see, again, if you want credibility, you want to stay at a university, you should probably get one. So I did. And I learned a lot in that process, and I'm glad I did that. But I was happy doing that. And so it wasn't until I had the opportunity, one, to get into administration because I had left the university and was working in Colorado Springs and was ready to come back to Fort Collins and had decided that I was coming back to Fort Collins and I needed a job. And they called me and said, hey, we interim assistant VP, do you want to do it? And I'm like, not really, but I need a job, so sure. And it'll get me back here and then I'll figure out. And what I tell people is, I was a director. We used to make fun of people in the administration building. And I'm sure people still do. And that's okay, because I tell them, I know you're making fun of me. That's all right, I used to do that. So I really didn't want to do that because it would take me away from students. And there's this amazing woman. She was an associate VP here, Cheryl Presley, African-American woman. And she used to tell me, and me and Linda Ahuna, who was a colleague of mine who passed away, and she used to tell us, you all are going to be, you're going to be in the administration building one day. You're going to have my job. And we would tell her, oh, hell no. We do not want your job. And then Cheryl, then she said to me, she goes, look, she said, if you really want to make systematic change, and it's good to make the individual change, and things you're doing with students are amazing, but if you really want to change this institution, then we have to be at the table, because that's where the decisions are made. And if we're not at the table, then they don't have to take our point of view, our perspective into consideration. So we have to start to do that. And I said, yeah, okay, yeah. And then she made me feel guilty. And so I remember that when I decided to take the position. And so the mentorship piece is huge because I always say good mentors are people who see things in other people that you don't see in yourself. And that's clearly true. And I've had mentors that have been students here. And so they come and always, I've had men mentors and women. And so it's important to be able to learn from people and take their experiences into consideration as you're looking at your own career and how you grow. And I'm really appreciative of those. And along with mentorship, I'm going to use the term Kathy said, you got to have your people. This is the other. You got to have people that you could go to, that you could tell anything to, that trust you, and that will tell you stuff that you need to hear. And that's been really important for me, and especially as women, and particularly as women of color or any other marginalized group. I'm often the only person of color in a lot of meetings and in a lot of programs and things. Sometimes I'll actually not sometimes, usually every time. I'll usually look around and go, okay, is anybody in this space that looks like me for thousands of people? And I'm always excited when I see at least one or two. I might not know them, but at least I know I'm not the only one. That gets old sometimes. And people in this role will come up and say some things to you that think they're being, nice, and they're not meaning to be rude or insensitive, but they just don't know. And sometimes you just want to say, seriously? You just said that to me? And instead you have to go, okay, nice to meet you, and then find somebody else to talk to as quickly as possible. But that gets old. That gets very old sometimes. And so sometimes I just have to vent, and I have to find people I can vent with. And it's important to do that. And so if you don't have those kind of folks in your life, you need to do that. And the reason why I'm the vice president is because of people, my colleagues, people that I trust that talk me into it. Because when Tony offered me the position, I first said no. I said, I don't see any women particularly women of color at that time who were vice presidents. Everybody I've seen have been men, and it seems like they work 24 hours a day. I have children. I have a partner. I like having a partner, and I particularly like having children. I added my partner because he used to say, I tell this story and I never put him in it. So if any of you ever see my husband, you can say, she told the story, she included you. So I do like him. And, but I like being a mom, you know, and there's things I want to do. And I'm not going to give up not seeing my kids because, you know, of this job. And Tony assured me, hey, you know, I have kids, you could do that. But it was really my colleagues that were in the division at the time that said, why would you let somebody else take this job when you can do it? Like, why would you do that? We want you. And again, seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I was scared. I'm like, that's too much stress. I like being able to be an associate VP and say goodbye at the end of the day and leave the VP working at the desk. You like that, don't you? Yep. And so, so I appreciate that, and I think it's important to have that in your life because they will help to keep you grounded, and that's important. And then the last thing I would just say is that one of the things that was really important to me, when I came here, I got married and had a child while I was an undergrad student at 20. And so when I came here, I started my career with a family. And the messages that I often got, even in student affairs, was that, boy, it's hard to do this job if you have a family. And I've actually sat and heard panels, men, say you can't be really a committed student affairs professional if you have family. You have to make a choice. And I thought, well, gee, I'm screwed because I'm starting this career with children. So how's that going to work for me? And it's really important to me that people, women and men, understand that they can be parents and still have the job, that there's a way to do it. It's not always easy, and you have to have support, but you can do it. And so I have lots of pictures of my family in my office. I have, when I got my PhD, my kids, I have 4 kids and 5 granddaughters. That has Dr. Mom, and they gave me that when I graduated, and I have that right on my desk. And I like to talk about that because in these roles, I know that you're role models, and that people look at me and us, and to say, hey, can I do that? And so I just try to make sure I talk with students or staff or anybody, say, hey, I was just a normal person, and just worked hard and believed in education and took advantage of all the opportunities that were offered to me as they came to learn more, even when I didn't have anything to do with my job, I thought. But I just wanted to learn more, and I've been able to do that. But I'm nobody special, that if you work hard and you work with people and you learn, then you can, if this is what you want to do, you could do that. But you can't navigate these systems or change the systems if you don't have the people around you to help you do that. So.
Boy, this is really hard to follow up after all you wonderful women telling your stories. So I did ask Kathy about this because I've been really worried about this whole day for now a week or so, because I really didn't know what to say or what to share with you. But as I really started thinking about this, I realized that I've been navigating systems my entire life. And I've been in education all of my life, except for 1 year. And I quickly came back to education and academics after that. But really, I started navigating systems when I was a very young person. So I was a very independent and a little bit ornery child, for sure. But my parents really instilled in me working hard and that you could do whatever you wanted to do. And I took that very at heart. And my parents didn't go to college, so I'm first generation. So they had really no understanding of what I wanted to do when I said I wanted to go to college. And I'm a professor in microbiology, immunology, pathology department. I'm also the Associate Dean for Academic and Student Affairs in the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. So you might figure that out. I was pretty interested in science, and that started at a very young age. And so I wanted to go to college and do science, study science in various ways. And I was actively told that women don't do science. And that was really disheartening. What am I going to do? I was an athlete in high school, and so I was very much encouraged to follow the athletics avenue. But I didn't want to do that. And I didn't have much of a support system to figure that out. But I trudged along and continued to do that. And then ultimately finished my bachelor's degree, and I was like, okay, I want to get a job in the science. I want to maybe continue my education. And I was very fortunate to land a job, and that was when I was at Ohio State University. And I worked in a lab for a year and a half or so, and then the person I worked for took a job here. So I moved here in 1981. So I've been at CSU a long time, although I had a hiatus. So I left and then ultimately had the opportunity to come back here. So I ran this person's lab because he took a department chair position in the college. And I loved the science. I loved doing what we were doing, but eventually I was training a lot of other students that were doing their graduate work. And so I decided, maybe I could do a graduate program. So I ultimately did a master's and then a PhD with my mentor, who is still my mentor today. And then I left, and I went and did a postdoc, and then I took a faculty position at the University of Kansas. So I spent 6 years at the University of Kansas on faculty, and then had the opportunity to come back here. And why did I have the opportunity to come back here? Mostly because of my mentor and many of the other individuals that were in the department in the college that I knew previously when I was here. So I think mentoring is probably one of the most important things, and mentoring can be at a very different level for many different people. But I've maintained those mentor relationships all this time. So I think that's a really important aspect of my life. So let me tell you another story about being a brand new faculty member. So I had been in academics for quite a while and seen a lot of things and had a pretty good understanding of how things worked, or so I thought. So I was first hired into a very small department, very collegial individuals, faculty members. I was really looking forward to working with them. And then one of those things in the 90s was we merged departments. And so my small department was merged with another department. And at that time, then after that happened, we had a new department head. So that when we interviewed the candidate for our department head, we were sitting, our group of faculty in the microbiology department there, sitting with all the colleagues and this individual interviewing for the position. And I sat right next to this individual. Never once did he ask me my name, what I did, or even look at me. I thought that was very odd. And I was more disturbed when he actually was given that position and he was hired. So I spent the next several years with this person as my department head. And he had absolutely gave me no support whatsoever. I was fortunate to have another colleague who introduced me to a woman in a different department, and that really helped me as a scientist learn to navigate a few more things. And then ultimately, it was my mentors and some other faculty in my college, current college now, while I was at a meeting and said, there's going to be a new faculty position opening up in our department, and you should apply for it. And I said, okay, great. So networking, that's another piece of advice that I can give to everybody. Meet those people, learn how to network, because we're always going to be looking out for you wherever you may be and helping you navigate your career as well. And so I did apply for the job, and very fortunate I was able to land that position, and I came back to CSU. So now I've been here about 26 years, but I have obviously a long way to go yet. So I, taught virology. I study viruses. That's my area of expertise, I guess, maybe. I don't know if I'm really an expert, but, and I taught students, and I also have a research lab. And so that was kind of my faculty kind of position, research service and teaching. And I was quite happy doing that. And I will tell you, I never in my wildest dreams ever anticipated being in a leadership position at the university. I was happy in doing my science. So again, it's something that I never saw in myself, similar to what I'm hearing here too, but others recognize that perhaps I could be in a leadership position. And again, it was my mentor, who again was the department chair a second or third time over all these years, when he assumed the chair of the department again and said, I need somebody to help me administer and with the graduate program in the department. So, and I said, why, me? What? And I had absolutely no leadership skills that I thought I had. I just didn't think that was me. But it was pretty hard to say no to my former mentor, who is now my boss, that I wouldn't do that. So I said, okay, and I was scared, there's no doubt. And I didn't have someone really help me navigate into that position in the details, because obviously he was doing a lot of other things. But I figured it out, asked a lot of questions, reached out to a lot of others within the college and across the university to really learn about what to do. And then having to learn all the rules and regulations about graduate education and the process of admissions and all those sorts of things. So that was a pretty steep learning curve, because I'd never done any of that before. But I feel like I did make a difference within the department as associate department head. I was in that position for 7 years. I think we really improved some of our graduate education. And that was fantastic. I will also say that navigating a lot of systems not only was the difficulty coming from another university to this university, but I had other people that, and I'm looking at Shannon because I know she's a good friend of my former graduate student. It was a really challenging, and how was I going to navigate, because I had someone who was a graduate student in my lab at another university. I'm thinking about taking another job. She also was married with a very young son at the time. And how can I disrupt them, a family, to ask them to move here? So that I really had to work really hard with myself. And should I be doing this? Am I doing this for myself? Yes, part of it, because I was very unhappy with the situation with this department head. But I talked to Tina and her family, and they were all game. So we packed up and came out here together. And she had to navigate a lot of systems too. So she was also in the Army Reserves and was called up to active duty during her PhD. So it was quite an adventure that we went on over these years. And I'd still like to say we're very good friends. I unfortunately don't see her as much as I would like to. But those are other things that, as a faculty member, you have to really consider, how you're going to progress in your career and how that impacts a lot of other people. So, and I worry about those things constantly, and those are the things that keep me up at night. But she successfully graduated and has been doing very, very well, and had a couple other children in the lab, not in the lab, but during her time. So it's been really, it has been great. And I've also had other graduate students that have had families while they've been pursuing their graduate program in my lab too, and that's been really rewarding. So I just merrily was going along, and then one day, the more recent department head said something about, oh, well, you know, Ken Blum is going to be retiring, and they're going to have a search for his position. And I thought, oh man, he's going to ask me to be on the search committee. One more search committee. And then he looked at me and said, oh, no. Your name is being floated around as someone that might be suitable for this position. And I just laughed and said, yeah, right. And I said, no way, that's not something I would ever want to do. Well, then there was a few other folks that really tried to persuade me, and I ignored most of what they were saying. And then it was the day before the application was due, and they said, really, we really want you to consider this position. And I said, I'm really not cut out for that, you know? And I said, okay, fine. And I had talked to Ken, and I felt that I owed him the respect to at least consider this and apply and go through with this. And so I did. And well, here I am, right? And so again, a very steep learning curve. But the one really fantastic thing about this job that I'm in now is getting to help faculty, staff, and students, getting to know the university as a much larger university, and getting to know these really wonderful women here and many of you out there in the audience today. That's been one of the most, because before you're always isolated in your own little unit, and I never felt like I had a good feel for the whole entire university, and I do now. And I've been really fortunate to have great people in other leadership positions across the different units that really helped me navigate this. Because I am a bit of an introvert, and I'm the one standing in the corner off to the side and thinking, okay, how can I get out of here as quick as I can? So it's been really hard for me to kind of get to that point to really talk to a lot of others. But everybody's been so welcoming and helping me navigate the system. And so, it's only been in this last year or so that I've actually really worked with more women in my position, because I have never had a woman supervisor, ever. And that I really thought about that last night when I was kind of trying to put a bunch of things together and thinking about where my career has been. And the other thing I would say is, you never know when the right opportunity comes, so don't always close the door for that. So I think for me, it's mentoring the people you work with. It's mostly about the people you work with. And if you've got a really good team, and I feel like I have a team of people that I work with locally in the college, and I really want them to have great professional development, and I'm here to do whatever I can for them. Students, staff, faculty, anybody, that's what it's all about. Is I'm here to help the next generation and help people be successful in what you're doing. So that's kind of where I am. So thank you very much. And I want to really thank these individuals, because they've really taught me a lot over this last couple of years. So I really admire them, and I really look up to them. So it's really nice to think of, wow, I really do have some women as mentors now. So, but I've had most of my men mentors have been fantastic, and they have always supported my career. So look for those great mentors and stick with them.
Well, in many cases, I didn't think I was prepared, but as I think back, the opportunities that I had, as I was saying, I was asked to be on a lot of committees, and and things, and I just, I sort of resented it a little bit at the time. I was like, okay, so you need another black person on the committee. Okay, fine, I'll do it. But I got to know faculty. I got to know other staff across campus. I learned about the broader university. And none of that was I doing to prepare for this position. But as I think about that, and a lot of the things I did even in my job as the director of the Cultural Center, because you work with everything, all of those things really played into preparing me. And I was more prepared than I thought I was. I think I just had to be reminded that, yeah, you could do that. And I also think for women sometimes, I know for me, the first thing I'll do is I don't know enough. I don't know enough to do this. Because I want to know everything because I want to be good at it. It goes back to if I'm going to do this, I know I'm representing, so I got to really do this well. And I think that keeps us sometimes from going out there and taking a chance and recognizing that we actually do know a lot more than we think we do.
Yeah, I would agree totally with Blanche. Being involved in various committees, you're not just learning the information related to that particular committee and the work it's doing, but you get to meet people in different parts of the university. And you learn so much from them, what's important in their units, what's important, or what are the important issues. I think often people who are involved with AP Council, CP Council, they're at a great advantage because they're asked to be on different committees. Not everybody is asked to be on committees, so sometimes you have to seek that opportunity out, and I would encourage you to do that. I know in our office we have a whole variety of committees, and we have people from all across campus who are serving and helping some of our activities. But definitely, you learn more than you think that you're going to learn.
One note I would make is you've heard a theme, people. Get to know people, network, create your networks. When you start a new role, a great learning opportunity is hold one-on-one meetings. Often in administrative positions, it's called the meet and greet. You do the meet and greet tour when you arrive, and you learn an incredible amount from doing that. The obvious, but then what you've heard today about people, about culture, about systems within the institution, and that's very helpful.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'll have one. First of all, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I'm hearing recurring themes of networking, mentoring. I'm curious, as a proud first-generation student who's had a lot of time and issues with navigating systems, and who is probably best described as heading into the second half of her career, I'm wondering if you have any advice for those of us who would like to have some agency in the second half of that career, and instead of having that second half happen to them, maybe have some more driving force in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
So the question was basically in the second half of someone's career, how do you help facilitate the career and with intentionality and purpose, and not just sort of think that you're along for the ride and that it's going to come, is basically the, yeah.
So I think in that situation, for me, it just kind of happened, right? And so I think what you might be interested in and possibly start navigating and finding the people who could help you make those decisions about what's right. So again, and I think that's a mentoring thing, right? Find your right mentor who knows you, who knows your skill set, who knows what your interests are, and meet with them and see whether somebody can help you identify what it is that you want to contribute or how to do something that is, again, that continuing rewarding system that you're doing. I can't emphasize enough how important mentoring is. And so find that right person, reach out to them. Sometimes that's hard, but I think there's a lot of, particularly women here at CSU in positions that will be glad to mentor and glad to help you find that right place.
The other piece that comes to mind is if you can somehow become involved in ways that take you a bit out of your circle or grow you within your circle. So to the point that Mary made earlier, can you become involved with the AP Council or the State Classified Personnel Council or a committee on campus? We have a lot of committees that university-wide work or college division-wide work. How can you plug into one of those? Or asked to be one of the individuals who applies and is considered for a program like AMI or HERS, or what are the ways that you can get the professional development, the exposure to the knowledge and to people that broadens your circle or allows you to go in a different direction? So the really neat thing about being an institution this large is that you can have a career, and examples are before you, where there are different jobs that you have had, and maybe even different jobs in different units, based on your skill set and your interests. So a way to try to leverage what you have and what you can acquire to go in a different direction.
You know, you had mentioned that it's important to know what you want to do. If you have some inclination about what you are interested in, and then seek out those people that you know are already working on that, schedule an appointment. I have people contacting me all the time. Can I talk to you about what your office does, how it does it? I'm interested in this kind of work. Who do you know? And I am always happy to meet with people about the work that we do and to share with them, you know, stories and how I got there and what other people are doing, and maybe make connections not just at Colorado State University but also across the state.
My question is, because some systems have been created that make it harder for people to navigate them, and a lot of the attention has been put on what we can do to navigate those systems, do you have any shortcuts for changing systems or actively eliminating some of the barriers so that it's not so much individual navigation in order to be successful?
I think for me, as I think of the work that we do, a lot of assumptions are made about what's not being done. And then people start trying to make changes based on what they know, but they don't know it all. And so I have learned over time that you really need to have a good understanding of what the issue is and what the policies are and who is manipulating those policies and what are the various policies that impact a particular issue and where do they reside, because they're not always in the obvious places. So you need to do a lot of homework, really, to find that out. Once you find out, then start engaging the people who are involved with those, bring those people together as a group. I think Colorado State University probably has more committees than any other institution on earth. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it is important that all of those people come together in the same place. And I believe pulling people together is really, really important, because all too often we act in silos and different people are doing different things, all trying to do the right thing, and then we find that we just didn't consider all aspects of a particular policy or practice. So I think it's really important to do your homework and then call people together. And generally what I have found is that people are very happy to work together to move something forward. Yeah.
So one of the pieces I mentioned briefly when I was speaking is that I think it's about our accomplices. I think it's about our accomplices in the work, and particularly male-identified accomplices in that work, and the individual relationships within that. Because I think that they have to be able to call out and disrupt the systems that they're actually a part of, and inherently benefiting from, right? So how do we do that? And so in our personal relationships, when they're sharing a passing story about how something's playing out, putting them in a position of saying, you've got to take more action than that. And also within those spaces when we're sitting in committee meetings, because we only have a few. You know, I always talk about this, and I mean it in this way too, is that we've got to shift the narrative and stop focusing on the coded language that happens in these spaces and making that more explicit and asking people to be clear about what they're saying, why they're saying it, and did they realize this is actually what it means when you do it this way. And so I think that we need to illuminate all of these systems more outwardly, and it's our accomplices that have to do that with us. And that doesn't take away the labor here.
And I think that takes some courage to do that. Earlier, Blanche said something about there's some advantage to being a vice president who's been here for 33 years or whatever, and not everybody's in that kind of situation. So it does take some courage to do those kinds of things, but we need to find that courage, and slowly but surely. And that's why networking and having allies to help you with that process is so important. But it is work that has to be done.
So a piece of what I hear in your question, Corey, is the individual versus the institution, right? And I think I know that both Blanche and Mary certainly spoke to this very directly, and I very much find this as well. The easiest way to bring about transformative change is to work within the system. It's very difficult to do it outside of the system, but would say to you, you need the whole continuum. So in that vein, I sound super reasonable when I come into a conversation after there has been a lot of other conversation. I leverage that. And so one of my most challenging but also rewarding experiences at CSU has been this last couple of years, serving as the chair of the Salary Equity Committee, and then also being the one administrator on the Standing Committee on the Status of Women Faculty. That committee has brought a lot of change, and it's all women. Obviously working with administration, but also because of time and place. Right now at CSU, because of Tony Frank, I'm going to say Tony Frank, because of Tony Frank, there's the opportunity for some transformative change. That's not to say that the change is easy, because Tony isn't the only one that has to be worked with to bring about the change. I don't know that there is a way to say institution change. I think of Margaret Mead in her quote. It's about folks making the change from within.
And I would offer that in that area, Tony is an accomplice. We're lucky that he's in that role as an accomplice, but I think that he sees his role as a man, also as president and chancellor, and then opens up that space for the change to also take root a little differently.
We are lucky that Tony is the president
Yes.
and chancellor and is opening up and is inviting this change.
Right.
But he has a lot of folks around him
Push
who maybe
against.
aren't as ready
That's right.
for the change. And that's where the work.
That was gentle.